We take for granted today that investing additional capital into most kinds of production increases productivity and output, a fundamental premise of capitalism and of the entire industrial revolution. This insight that remains valid today in an age of computers and robots comes to us directly from the pens of Malthus, Ricardo, and the other founders of economics. Malthus also declares that when the products of industry are produced more cheaply and efficiently, their real price will fall.
From the accumulation and better distribution of capital, manufactures will be produced with less labor, and consequently a given quantity of corn will command a much greater quantity of manufactures than while the country was poor.
When he started with his first essay in 1798, Malthus did not work out all the implications of the growth of capital and rising productivity. His original vision was a static equilibrium in which the output of the land, or what he called the means of subsistence, placed a limit or check on the possible size of the population. These two quantities must remain in balance. If the population increases beyond this limit in the absence of preventive checks, positive checks will restore the balance. But we already have seen one awkward contradiction in the first essay, a riddle that Malthus seems not to have recognized at that point, and that he certainly did not explain. Some societies apparently are richer than others and have more civilized habits of living that translate into different ratios of resources to population, higher than just the bare minimum needed for survival. So long as we consider only food and population, this doesn't add up. Extra food per person should immediately translate into an increase in population. Kingsley Davis, writing nearly 200 years later, called this the food alone fallacy. But by 1803, Malthus already was reaching beyond this food alone fallacy. In the 1803 edition of his essay, Malthus more fully recognized that the productive economy does indeed include what Adam Smith called returns to labor as well as returns to land. The returns to land are the means of subsistence, the food supply that Malthus saw as the ultimate limit on population. The returns to labor include all the commodities produced by the manufacturing sector. Malthus often repeats the phrase necessaries and conveniences of life throughout his essay. But as we have seen in 1798 original, he also tended to use this phrase interchangeably with means of subsistence. We actually should match only the word necessaries with the returns to land, the means of subsistence, the food supply produced by agriculture. We can match the word conveniences with the returns to labor instead, the manufactured output of commodities, from silks and laces to locomotives and indoor plumbing. We have already heard Malthus tell us that capital is attracted to manufacturing because it grows faster there than in agriculture. Consequently, as capitalism expands, conveniences get cheaper. By 1803, he begins to see where all these conveniences might lead. Malthus definitely did not believe that you could simply explain to the lower classes, or even the better off, more educated classes, how it was in their own long-term interests to control the passion between the sexes with preventive checks, and that people would then just go and do what was logical. He insisted that we are not purely rational beings, and that we often do things under the influence of our passions, even when we know better. But the economist in him was growing stronger, and by 1803 he was beginning to talk about what today we would call opportunity costs. On this point, Malthus could be talking about our motives and behavior in any contemporary advanced country around the world. Where logic is insufficient to motivate us, you can appeal to our appetites instead. Like Madonna, we all have become material girls and boys living in a material world. We have been expertly trained by advertising and marketing, by our friends and families, to regard many of the comforts and conveniences as essentials of life itself. For contemporary Americans, a mobile phone and a car are as indispensable as food and water. And Malthus may have been right when he viewed this taste for comforts and conveniences as the ultimate preventive check to population. For one thing, it explains why preventive checks work so much better among the owner class in any society. These elites have a strongly developed taste for comforts and conveniences and will modify their reproductive behavior to guarantee that they can enjoy such luxuries. On a larger scale, the higher the standard of living and the greater the access to comforts and conveniences from one country to the next, the lower the birth rate. Whole populations can become addicted to the taste for comforts and conveniences and alter their demographic patterns to satisfy that taste. Some of the most developed countries are actually losing population because their birth rates are so low. We are distracted from our carnal appetites by our material appetites. So this, according to Malthus, appears to be the way to go. The more that increasing capital makes comforts and conveniences plentiful and cheap, the more people will become preoccupied with them and distracted from churning out a flood of babies.
The lower classes of society seldom acquire a decided taste for conveniences and comforts until they become plentiful compared with food.
If the rich get richer while the poor get babies, the trick is to make everyone feel rich. For Malthus, the real question becomes how best to encourage the growth of capital and the expansion of the manufacturing sector of the economy. Instead of useless silks and laces, all those commodities become the ultimate preventive checks to the power of population. They also provide the solution to our riddle of how different states can have different levels of living. The advanced states have successfully distracted their populations from reproducing by turning them into material girls and boys living in a material world, obsessed with their material possessions.
A taste for the comforts and conveniences of life will prevent people from marrying under the certainty of being deprived of these advantages.
It is not mainly that these populations have increased the food supply, although that probably happens as well. All humans do have similar metabolic requirements for food, and people can only eat so much. Most of the new material wealth appears as conveniences rather than necessities. But these conveniences turn out to be preventive checks to population in their own right.
We can hardly expect to find any check to marriage so little prejudicial to the happiness and the virtue of society as the general prevalence of such a taste.
In his 1803 essay, we also glimpse the career shift of Malthus from country parson to political economist in his recipe for how to achieve this condition of material preventive checks, happiness and virtue. In the 1798 essay, he was preaching to individual men and women to exercise moral restraint as their religious duty in accordance with God's will. 5 years later, he is giving advice to governments about how to organize the laws of society.
The first grand requisite to the growth of prudential habits is the perfect security of property, and next perhaps is that respectability and importance that are given to the lower classes by equal laws, and the possession of some influence in framing them.
The government must protect and encourage capitalism in order to save us from misery and vice. It is not morality that saves us from ourselves, but materialism.
The more excellent, therefore, is the government, the more does it tend to generate that prudence and elevation of sentiment by which alone poverty can be avoided.
Malthus wrote not only about land and labor, but also about capital. The balance of population and subsistence are only two of the three factors of production and only two of the three dimensions in his writings. Already by 1803, 5 years after the first essay, Malthus placed capital in the first position of importance. Capital becomes the ultimate force that we must encourage with all the tools of government so that it can grow faster than either population or the food supply. Rising wealth becomes our best hope for containing the power of population, creating preventive checks based on our increasing taste for the conveniences that come with prosperity. Capitalism puts us on the high road to human happiness, leading us away from a world of misery and vice. That explains why Marx and Engels had to attack Malthus desperately and constantly, since they believed that capitalism as a system had to be destroyed. Malthus not only frightens us with his original gloomy picture of a destiny of misery and vice under the dominion of the power of population, but once we recognize all three dimensions of land, labor, and capital, he also offers us an escape route to material prosperity, a purely selfish, materialistic check to population, and the possibility of comfort and happiness if we have the wisdom to embrace capitalism as a way of life.